All right, welcome to the beginning to the end. This is chapter 17, where we're going to be dealing with the closing aspect of all this transaction that we've been talking to. This is the culmination of everything that's been going on. We've talked about agency and how to create it, the forms to use, the different types of agents. We've talked about all this other stuff, what a contract is. Now we're going to talk about the closing and dealing with the closing, specifically the interaction between the two sides. Up to now, we have never really talked about the buyer's interaction with the seller or the seller's interaction with the buyer. Remember, one of our main jobs is to act as an insulator between those people, and they never really see or meet each other. This is the first time that's happened. So we're going to talk about the process and how they actually do the closing, the specific process, the people involved, how it works. We're going to talk about RESPA. I told you we would get to RESPA, which is the settlement procedure, and how they control what goes on, okay? The one thing that I like to tell everybody, we're going to talk about buyers and credits, sellers, debits, buyers, credits, all kinds of proration of math issues. There's going to be some math today. I'm going to show you some tricks that you can use on the test that will speed up the questions for you better. And we're going to talk about the accuracy of the closing statement, because I've always found that just about every time a closing statement gets generated, there's one mistake. About every time. Sometimes it's a very simple mistake, sometimes it's a very complex, but we're going to show you how to read the closing statements, and I'm going to show you how to balance the closing statement, okay? A couple things you need to remember that will help you on the exam. Couple things. One, the closing is seen as cash. It's a cash closing. Even though there's a loan involved, the way we balance the equation is like it's cash. So that'll help you out when we start doing the closing. Remember that the loan that the buyer's getting, because it's a lien, they're handing us the loan, so it's like the buyer's bringing that money to the table. We all think of a loan as a debit IO. It may be after you sign the IOU, but it's seen as cash when you come to the closing, okay? Keep that in mind. The other thing is there's only two people at the closing. Buyers and sellers. All right? You think you're going to laugh, but later on when I ask you a question, you're all going to look at me and I'm going to say, remember, there's only two people. I'm not paying for anything. You're not paying for anything. The title company's not paying for anything. It's all the buyers and sellers. All right? You ready? All right. So the closing involves two major events. Remember, a contract is a promise that has to be fulfilled. So there are two events. The first event is the transfer of the real estate through the deed, and the second event is the transfer of money from one to the other. They call it a side. There's the buyer's side of the table, there's the seller's side of the table. So when some companies keep track and you get awards for the number of sides you do, some keep track of the award of the amount of money you do. Hey, I'm a $20 million producer, or something like that. Some people, hey, I did 100 sides last year. If you work a limited agent, how many sides would that be? Two. You get credit for two sides on that. So if you're a company that tracks that, some companies give bonuses once you reach certain milestones. So you want to keep track of, hey, I've done 7 sides or 8 sides, or I've made $10 million, some stuff like that. The two people at the table are the buyer and the seller. The buyer's issue is what? What does the buyer want? What's the main thing the buyer wants in this transaction? Very good. He wants the clean title or clear title. All right? So in order to prove that he is getting clear title, there may be several documents the buyer ends up collecting. Things like the lien releases, things like receipts that the seller has paid off stuff. He wants the title insurance. He wants the deed that's signed by the seller. So all of these documents are the buyer's main issue. He wants to make sure that he is in fact getting all those things that they promised. And remember what they promised? I have the right to sell it. I'll remove all the liens. I promise this forever. Because the buyer asked for the general warranty deed. Seller said, I'll give it to you. Now he's proving it by showing all of these documents. Hey, here's the payoff of my mortgage, so your lien will be first. Here's the payoff of that HVAC that I had to get to. So here's the receipt that shows I paid that. Here's the deed that transfers the title over, okay? So the buyer wants clear title, and he will get a bunch of documents to prove that. Yeah, of course, he's also going to get all his loan documents that he's going to sign. And if it's a rental property, he may get copies of leases. If I'm buying an investment property where there's a tenant in it, I want a copy of the lease, so I will have the lease as well. Now, before the buyer goes to closing, typically they have what's called a final walkthrough of the property. Remember, he saw the house 45 days ago when he made an offer. He may have seen it one other time during the home inspection, but he certainly wants to see it right before he closes. Because if he closes on the property, he accepts it the way it is. So think back about when he made the offer. Part of his offer, let's just say, says, I want, I don't know, the ceiling fan to be gone. When you go to closing, before you go to the walkthrough and make sure the ceiling fan is gone. Because if you didn't, you end up with that problem. All right? And this goes back to, if you remember the story about the light bulbs, where my client did not go to the final walkthrough. If he did, we would have found that out. We could have called the other agent and go, hey, we got a problem. Then you get to play that great game of chicken. Who's going to flinch first? Would my client not really buy a dream home because it's missing $85,000 or $85 worth of light bulbs? Yes? No? Who knows? If you're on the other side of that table, are you willing to take that chance? I don't know. You might be. Because the only stick the buyer has in this is, I'm not closing. You said this would be done, this would be done. If it's not done, I'm not closing. All right? The other side of that coin is the seller really going to not pony up because he's already moved out, hopefully. And if you don't close, guess what he gets to do? Move back in. All right? So you've got them kind of in a barrel, and they've got you kind of in a barrel. So you always try and want to work something out. I have seen people go to closing with go to a walkthrough with no problems. I've seen people go to walkthrough with problems that we've solved. I've seen people not go to the final walkthrough and have no problems. And of course, the fourth choice is I've seen people not go to walkthrough and have problems, i.e. the light bulb dude.
So when we were selling our house in Irvington, the couple that was buying it couldn't make it for the inspection, but the real estate agent came as their representative.
Right.
If she would have missed something sitting at that table, what kind of accountability was she have been held to? If this
Well, no, but that would be the home inspectors. If the home inspector missed something, because remember, that's not I'm there as their representative. That's just to ask or be their intermediary. I'm not there to tell the home inspector, did you get that hole? Did you get that? Because that's not my job.
for us to fill in for an inspection?
I don't know. I don't know what the word common means.
Well, it's not an unusual request.
I will tell you that most realtors typically may show up so they can introduce their client to the home inspector and then say something like, hey, this is going to be a 3-hour process. I really don't like you enough to stay that long. That's not what they say, but that's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
So they may show up and go, hey, Mr. Buyer, here's the home inspector. Home inspector, there's the buyer. I'll stand here for 20 minutes. So I can say, hey, everything under control? You got him? Okay. At that point, remember, the buyer's now his client because this is not in my purview of what I'm supposed to do. So I may show up to introduce them and stuff like that and then go, All right, I'll talk to you later. I'm going back to the office. I got other deals I need to work on. That's typically, there are some buyers or some agents that don't go, hey, meet Bob at the house. He'll be there at 4 o'clock. He's going to expect you to write a check for $375. When he's done, Bob will contact me with the report. Have a good day, and never go. All right? Typically, I think the modus operandi is they may show up, do the introduction, and then leave.
But she was actually there as physical representative
Yeah.
of the buyers.
That's a whole new thing. That's just come about, I'd say, recently in the last 5 or 6 years, where the buyers actually go to the home inspection. Normally, it used to be the home inspector would go out, do his duty, and send us the report. Now, the home inspector, in his warm, fuzzy business model, wants the client to come out. The problem that you run into as the listing side, we just had this the other day, where the home inspector may say something that the buyer keys in on that the home inspector doesn't think A, that important, or B, doesn't write it down, and then the buyer writes this inspection response and goes, hey, we think the roof's on backwards. Really? Because the report doesn't say that. Well, yeah, when we were standing there talking, he said that if he'd have built his house, he'd have put it on the other way. Well, sorry, it's not in the inspection.
They just stay fixated on one thing.
Yeah, they can get fixated on one thing, or the home inspector will say something. And a lot of times now there's a lot of communication about home inspectors going outside of their bounds of what they actually should be doing.
A matter of opinion than fact.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's almost like it's become an opinion instead of a fact, like that one. And that's an actual true scenario, by the way, where the home inspector said the roof was on backwards. All right? He said, if I'd have built this house, I'd have faced the gables the other way instead of this way. Of course, it's not wrong.
He's an inspector, not a builder.
Yeah, it's not wrong, but the client on the other side said, oh, the roof's on wrong. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean wrong? A, it's not even in the report. And how can it be on wrong? So that buyer heard something that he thought was a problem, which turned out to really was not a problem. It's just a matter of opinion, and maybe from even an uneducated guy that's not a builder. Maybe he was a builder, I don't know. Yeah. So I push for buyers shouldn't go. The other reason is it also slows the process down tremendously, because now the home inspector is trying to reteach everybody. You know, oh, I talked about furnace filter yesterday. Now I got to talk about it again because it's a whole new buyer, whole new property. Whereas if he was by himself, he could go furnace filter check, check and be done in an hour and a half. Now it's a 3-hour process because you got these people dragging along. The other problem that you have from a real estate standpoint is while they're standing in there, does that buyer start doing something that they shouldn't? Like looking through underwear drawers.
Liability.
Yeah.
Or does the inspector say something that makes the buyer say, I don't want it?
Oh, that happens a lot. That happens a whole lot where the inspector will say something and the buyer's like, I don't want the house now. You know? So. Well, and that's the other thing, and we're kind of out of the realm here. This is more for practical use. People forget to realize that there's brand new cars and there's used cars. When you go buy a used car, you look at it and go, oh, well, there's a dent. Okay, I understand that because I'm paying used car price, all right? Houses work the same way. Nothing's more infuriating than getting an inspection report on a 100-year-old house that the buyer wanted to put an offer in and then goes, oh, well, there's loose floorboards in the kitchen. Well, no shit, Dick Tracy. It's a 100-year-old house. You're buying a used house. You need to keep that in mind when you're doing it. Now, I understand that they want things to be perfect, but they also didn't agree on a perfect house price. So there's a lot to be said for that. More inspectors right now are killing deals than I think appraisers are. More inspectors. So they got to do the final walkthrough. I teach my agents to schedule closings in the afternoon, 2, 3, 4 o'clock. Schedule the showings that morning, 8, 9, 10 a.m., so that you have some time if something happens. Hey, it's 10 o'clock. I'll call Maggie and go, hey, we got a closing in 6 hours, but we got a problem. How can we solve that before 6 hours shows up. So typically that's the way I like. There are people I know that have scheduled closings at noon and go to the walkthrough at 11. That really doesn't leave a lot of time. And if you miss your noon closing, the title company's like, hey, we're busy until next week. We can't get you in. So I like to schedule walkthroughs early in the morning. Sometimes you can do it the night before. I've seen that happen, where they schedule it Monday night at 5 o'clock and their closing's Tuesday morning. All right? Hopefully, you also want the client out of the house, the seller out of the house, because if they're not out of the house, it doesn't do you any good because they could tear the house up while they're moving out. And I have seen that. I've seen a perfect house, and then after they moved out, drywall damage, oh, we bumped with the couch and destroyed the drywall. Well, that's not the house the buyer put the offer in on. What are we going to do to solve this problem? You know, you've got damage to this house, and remember, under the Uniform Vendor Purchaser Risk Act, it's the seller's job to deliver a property in the same condition that the buyer and seller agreed to in the purchase agreement. We didn't agree to busted drywall in the living room or all the light bulbs gone. At the top of the next page is the survey. I will tell you that this is a very negotiated part, and depending on what side of the table I'm on, I always argue it's the other side's cost. You can spin it either way you want. You know, you're selling that property to my client, it should be your cost to prove that you're actually selling lot 47, right? That's what I would say. If I'm on the seller side, I would say, really, you're buying this. Your lender's going to want to know exactly what he's buying. It's probably your cost to prove to your lender what you're buying. So I can argue both sides of that. It just kind of depends. There's going to be some title evidence issues, and what we're going to do is change audio files real quick, so hold on.